The 4-day pause in fighting in Gaza to allow for the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners, it is legitimately a breakthrough. In theory, it freezes the constantly growing death toll, hits the brakes on a 6-week war, allows humanitarian aid in and hostages out. But this is an exceedingly fragile truce. Both sides are still technically at war, and for all of the reasons much of the world requires this truce to hold, there is no shortage of ways it could fall apart.
Ceasefires are normally difficult to establish. Almost always there are violations after they go into effect.
The only reason Israel even considered making this deal was because it sets free 50 Israeli women and children. But the logistics challenge is immense. First, realize that the taking of hostages to begin with wasn't just violent, it was chaotic, because Hamas fighters weren't the only ones taking prisoners. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad is another militant group operating in Gaza. It also took part in the October 7th attacks and claims to have taken dozens of hostages. Right now, there may be as many as 240 scattered across Gaza, and it's not at all clear that there is a central authority responsible for them all. According to The Guardian, in earlier negotiations, Israel demanded Hamas provide a full list of every hostage in Gaza, their name, nationality, everything. But Hamas said it couldn't provide such a list unless the bombing stopped, because hostages were so spread out and being held by different groups. To quote The Guardian, that suggested even Hamas leaders do not know for sure how many people are held captive, their locations, or the number who have survived the bombardments. Then there's the logistical challenge of organizing a hostage exchange on this scale through a labyrinth of tunnels scattered below cities under constant bombardment. In this video prepared and released by Hamas, in the case of 2 Americans released on October 20th, Qatar helped arrange for the Red Cross to meet Hamas in Gaza. Then, once safely across to Israel, the army, the IDF, took them in to discuss what they'd seen, to reunite them with family, and to connect them with US embassy officials. Now, Israel and Hamas will have to do that many times over several days on both sides. For every hostage released, Israel has promised to release 3 Palestinians from Israeli jails. That back and forth transfer is extremely delicate.
It is a concern, frankly, about how they will be transported, how long that process will take. So there are a whole series of concerns that have to do with the capacity of some of these hostages to survive, frankly.
Even as the 2 sides were discussing a break in the fighting, Israeli aerial bombardment continued. The siege on the ground continued, and both sides were clear about just how transactional this truce would be.
אנחנו במלחמה, ונמשיך במלחמה. נמשיך במלחמה עד שנשיג את כל היעדים שלנו.
Israel's aim, dismantle Hamas, and stopping before then, Netanyahu says, hevel, nonsense. Hamas was similarly provocative with its language. We affirm that our hands will remain on the trigger, they said in a statement. The rockets, bullets, and bombs may stop flying for a time, but both sides are undoubtedly thinking ahead to when the fighting resumes. And unlike what we often see in ceasefires, there will be no troop pullback. Israel's tanks, armored vehicles, soldiers that are already behind enemy lines inside Gaza, they'll stay in Gaza during the truce.
What could go badly wrong is if there is even a minor violation of the ceasefire, either by Hamas or by the IDF. in responding to a local incident.
Maintaining a truce in an otherwise active battle zone requires immense discipline, from every individual soldier and right up the chain of command. Any violation of the truce, even a perceived violation, risks exploding the whole situation.
Every time you break your ceasefire, it's more difficult to reestablish. These negotiations were arduous and painstaking. Teams would have to reassemble to try to solve a problem which is frankly very difficult to solve, that there are no stable lines for either the IDF or Hamas to withdraw to.
אני דורשת מבנימין נתניהו ומכל הקבינט לתת לנו תשובות. אין לנו כוח יותר! אין לנו כוח!
Netanyahu has been under tremendous domestic pressure to prioritize the rescue of hostages over the bombardment of Gaza. But with a truce now agreed upon, there are those within Netanyahu's government who are fiercely opposed to any pause in fighting. This is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He is the leader of a far-right political party called Jewish Power. He's openly called for the expulsion of disloyal Palestinian citizens in Israel. He is a provocateur who has led several visits and marches to the Temple Mount to assert Jewish authority on a site sacred to Muslims, where only Muslims are allowed to pray. And today, he happens to be Netanyahu's national security minister. He and other members of his party opposed the truce. And in fact, he reportedly called for the offensive in Gaza to intensify to secure better terms. Now, this is not to say that the truce is in jeopardy.
They had no capacity to influence the outcome. They were the only ones to oppose. Doesn't matter because the majority of the parliament is in favor of this, so they're irrelevant.
But it is worth pointing out, the Netanyahu coalition is not one homogeneous, singularly unified body. There are many things on which they disagree, including how best to achieve the goal of eliminating Hamas. So where does this leave the truce? It is intended to last at least through the weekend, with the possibility of daily extensions for every 10 additional hostages Hamas releases. Then, once the truce expires, both sides seem pretty transparent. Each wants to eliminate the other, so the war will continue.